There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Bookmaniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another tag. This is the longest books I read tag, 2012 to 2019. Originally created by Joey at Game of Authors, and I saw Cousin of Always Doing's version the other day and thought, oh, I want to try that. I don't know if she tagged me. I don't need to be tagged. I just go ahead and do it. So thank you for tagging me if you tagged me, cousin. Here we go. So I don't have records going back to 2012. They wanted it the last 10 years. So Joey of Game of Authors did it from 2010 to 2019. I don't have records going back earlier than 2016. I have a memory of a couple tomes I read in the previous few years, so I don't have a full run. So if I go from the oldest, in 2014, I'm pretty sure it was 2014, I read the Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy. Now, the Forsyte Saga is a collection of maybe 5 average-length novels as a series, but I read it in one volume as an ebook, and the one volume as an ebook was about 1,000 pages. And I read it on an iPhone 4, very small screen, as a free ebook, and I absolutely loved it. I just thought it was a stunning work of literature that I want to revisit. I want to read more about John Galsworthy before I reread it, but as a early 20th century novel, I don't think there's anything better. And it was at a time when I was not the obsessive reader that I am now. I read it on the train, I read it on work breaks, I read the whole damn thing on my little tiny black iPhone, and I just fell into that novel, that series of novels. If you haven't read the Forsyte Saga, you must. I had my grandfather Mooney's copy of the Forsyte Saga on my shelves for years, and then when I left Canada to come to Japan, I got rid of it and 10,000 other books and never read it, but I finally read it in Japan, and Unforgettable. In 2015, I think that's when I read Ichikyu Hachiyon I 1Q84 by Murakami Haruki. I didn't read much else that year other than that novel, and that novel is 700 pages. I thought that novel was a brilliant failure. It didn't all hang together, but so much of it I loved. I think it's a failure and a masterpiece, both. I loved the sexuality of the novel. I loved the grand sweep of all of the issues within not only Japan, but issues that we could relate to in Western culture that were probed through such deeply realized characters. And I would disagree with anybody who thought that the female protagonist, there was a male protagonist who was so hot, and female protagonist who I loved, and I thought she was a really fully realized character. Now, Murakami gets a lot of grief from people for not writing women well. I thought that female character was fantastic. But again, I read it 2015. I wasn't even barely woke by then, people. So please disagree with me in the comments below, if need be. So now going to the years for which I do have records. And when I say records, I mean Goodreads. I joined Goodreads in 2016. And in 2016, the longest book I read, clocking in at 727 pages, was Joe Hill's The Fireman. In those days, I was really deeply connected to Book Riot and all of their podcasts, and they were promoting Joe Hill and this novel heavily, and I drank the Kool-Aid. Boy, do I regret that. I did it on audio. And by the end, again, it's only after that. It's only since 2016 that I began to develop my crotchety individual tastes. And when I look back on how much time I wasted on that fucking piece of shit, oh my god. The second biggest novel I read that year was Volume 2 of the Karl Ove Knausgaard series of novels, A Man in Love, and I loved that. That was 664 pages. And coming in at number 3 was Wolf Hall, which just was and is a stunning piece of literature. In 2017, the biggest book I read was this collected stories of Mavis Gallant, the Everyman's Library edition, and it is 950 pages. And Mavis Gallant is the best short story writer in the world. Today I'll say she's even better than Alice Munro. Tomorrow I might invert that ranking, but nobody reads her anymore, and she is the best. She's fallen through the cracks because she was a Canadian writer who went to Paris in 1950 as a young woman and wrote short stories for the rest of her life, and she died at the age of 90 or something about a decade ago. And all of her stories were published in the New Yorker, and they're all about Europeans and expatriates in Europe. So unless you read the New Yorker at that time, or you're particularly interested in the short story form or expatriates, it's really easy to miss her, and what a tragedy to miss Mavis Gallant. Then coming in at 600 pages, I read in 2017 A Fine Balance, one of the best novels ever written by Rohinton Mistry. I am now finally, 3 years later, reading his debut novel, Such a Long Journey. And in 2018, and this is thanks to Steve Donoghue, the longest book I read was coming in at 850 pages, book number 1 of the Palliser series by Anthony Trollope, Can You Forgive Her? Steve did a read-along that year, and I absolutely loved it. Didn't do so well with book 2 last year, but Can You Forgive Her is one of my favorite Victorian novels. I absolutely loved it, and in fact, it was emotionally powerful. Trollope can get a little bit dry when he doesn't have colorful female characters in his fiction, and he sure did in Can You Forgive Her? And my second longest novel was Bark Skins by Annie Proulx, which I thought was pretty much of a failure. And number 3 at 680 pages was Elizabeth Gaskell's Wives and Daughters, which I absolutely loved. Last year, 2019, the longest book I read was The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikabu. Apparently, nobody really knows who wrote it. This translation is by Royale Tyler. I did this as a buddy read over 2 months, I think, with Britta Böhler. And I didn't love it, but I'm sure glad I read it. The things that I complained about as soon as I finished are fading over time, and I'm more connected to what I did love. I mean, it's just a fascinating way to immerse yourself in Japanese culture, and there were so many things in this novel, the first novel ever written, about the court life in Japan of that era, that illuminated my experience of Japanese culture at the current moment. So that was fascinating. I was also struck by the sexuality of this book, including moments of startling, memorable homoeroticism. Unforgettable. If I didn't say already, The Tale of Genji was almost 1,200 pages. Coming in for the second longest novel last year at a mere 517 pages was Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. I didn't grab the book. Here's the cover image. Didn't like that one very much either. Again, the female characters didn't rise to the occasion. It was just a bunch of dull politicians and lawyers. And so far this year, again, I just didn't get all the books because all those tomes are heavy, people, so I'm not going to show you the physical book, but the longest book I've read so far this year is London Belongs to Me by Norman Collins, a 1945 British novel, 740 pages, and it was really quite good. Right now, I am reading a massive tome. I've been reading it for well over 6 months. Let's see, when did I start it? 8 months ago. And that is Samuel Richardson's 1748 novel, something like that, 1748, Clarissa. After 8 months, I am 46% through Volume 1 of the audiobook. 34 hours. I'm almost halfway through the 34-hour Part 1, and then there's Part 2. I'm loving it, but I'm just dipping into it not very often. So, let me end by taking up some of the issues that Cousin of Always Doing raised at the end of her video, because she posed the question, why were so many of the longest books that she had read in the previous several years by white men? So I think that's because white men are really insecure and size matters. I think that white men do go on, and women don't usually go on that long, and non-white male writers don't usually go on that long. I think there's something there. I also think most books that are long are too long. Most books that are like 500 pages or more should be 300-page novels. Please discuss. But what tomes are there that are not written by white men? There was a novel that I know Ange of Beyond the Pages read. Was it even written? Yeah, it was somewhere early to mid 19th century. The name has gone out of my head. It's pretty melodramatic. I don't think I'm interested in reading it necessarily. I've got a couple here, so I'm looking forward to eventually getting to this African novel, The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell, and it comes in at almost 600 pages. Serpell is a Zambian-American novelist. I've heard good things about it. This one. The last time I held this up, 700 people said, let's do a buddy read or a read-along or something, and I never got back to anybody, because this one is intimidating. A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. It comes in at more than 1,300 pages. But I hear it's magnificent. I don't think I'm going to get to it this year. I'm not the kind of booktuber that does read-alongs, because, what the hell do I know? But it's a lovely hardcover edition. I picked up for $5 at a used bookstore in Japan, in Tokyo. I think that's all I have to say about big books, but I like big books. Size does matter. I'm attracted to and intimidated by big books. In January, I bailed on 3 large books. Richard Powers' The Overstory, which I had started late in 2019, Duck's Newburyport, and the novel from Georgia, Nino Harachvili's The Eighth Life. So not every tome works for me, obviously, and I was thinking that I would keep at least one large book going the whole year, but after 3 bails in a row, I thought, I'm going to give it a break. Maybe the next one I will pick up will be The Old Drift, but I'm not going to commit to anything. When the spirit moves me, I will pick up another tome. There's lots of Victorian tomes. The last thing I'll say, you're used to my hodgepodge. Nothing's particularly organized, but it's particularly disorganized tonight. March of the Mammoths is coming. When? Which month? In March! And I love the idea, but the part of it that makes me not want to join is that I don't believe in reading a tome, or books of any length for that matter, too fast. So the idea of reading a mammoth book, what is their cutoff? 600-700 pages? I forget. Maybe more than 500 pages or more than 800 pages? I've forgotten what their criteria is. But the idea of reading a book of that length in a month is completely anathema to me. Obviously, I'm not judging anybody else. I think a 300-page novel shouldn't be read any quicker than within a 30-day period. A novella, maybe 2 weeks. A tome, 3 months is, I think, giving it short shrift. And that is the place that I've arrived at in my reading life, and that's not everybody's. The March of the Mammoths for me would be like a 6-month project. All right, people, that's what I have to say. And should I tag somebody? I think I should. Who will I tag? When I get to the end of a tag video and I realize I have forgot to make a list of people to tag, I just go to my comment section. So those of you who comment on my videos take precedence. So, Heidi of My Reading Life, Karen of Runwright Reads. I don't know this guy's name, but his channel name is Strike the Sun MD. Hannah of Hannah's Books, Alba of Seriela, Jaclyn of 6 Minutes from me, Britta Böhler. Has Steve Donoghue done this? I'm not sure. Brian of Bookish. And the guys, I'm sorry, you have very strange pen names that I have not got into my head yet, but I love your channel. I will just identify you by your channel name, the Codex Cantina. That's all I got. Thanks for watching.